that, I believe it's time for Amield's presentation. I'll give you the floor. Thanks.
Could I get the slides, please? Great, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Capital Markets Authority of Kuwait for holding this important symposium today. I'd like to start very briefly by introducing the Pearl Initiative. It's a not-for-profit organization that's only around 2 years old, was very much started by business leaders across the GCC to promote to and communicate with the wider business community in the GCC of the benefits of adopting higher standards of accountability and transparency in business. The Pearl Initiative was set up in cooperation with the United Nations Office for Partnerships. Our offices are based at the American University of Sharjah, but as I said, we're very much an independent not-for-profit that's driven by business in the region. We hold dialogue forums where we raise awareness and bring issues to the table on topics of corporate governance, reporting, responsible business practices, anti-bribery and corruption, good practices in corporates, for example. We generate research and analysis on these topics in the region in order to shed light on what's going on and improve understanding. And we work with universities, with business leaders of tomorrow on these topics, on curriculums, on workshops, on improving the links between universities and businesses. We are all about what Alyssa touched on, which is the carrot message, if you like, the reinforcement of the business case to the business community for adopting better standards as a key pillar for long-term direct value creation. We're about raising awareness, about influencing mindsets, and very much about producing analysis and sharing good practice experiences from within the region so that we can learn from those experiences and improve adoption rates across the business community. What I'd like to touch on this afternoon is a report that we've just launched in the last few days. There are plenty of copies available at the registration desk, and it is a research-based report on governance practices in GCC family firms. We interviewed over 100 family firms right across the GCC and asked structured questions about what corporate and family governance practices they have in place and what views they have on what's happening going forward. The idea is that we can raise awareness and understanding on governance issues, trends and practices, that we enable family firms to better benchmark their own businesses and to think about how they can implement on these topics. So the point of view I'm coming at today is unashamedly focusing on the corporate angle and the business case for this. There is so little data, so little information available on what is going on within the family firm sector in the region here. And at the end of the day, it's estimated that 80% of GCC non-oil GDP is family firms. So it's very important for us to get a better understanding of what's going on and what's driving behavior in this sector. This is just a taste of some of the insight generated from the research that we've done. I'm going to talk a little about key issues and priorities that are top of mind in family firms in the region. Absolutely central, as has come up a number of times today, is the board and how the board of companies is organised and run most optimally. I'll touch on family governance structures, and we also asked questions about transparency and accountability. The interviews we carried out identified some key issues and priorities that are top of mind with family firm business leaders in the region. It is clear that there is a good understanding that access to finance is helped by having better corporate governance structures in place, and this aspect of the business case is becoming increasingly well understood and well appreciated. What also became apparent from the research we did is that there is an absolute business driver in the minds of the heads of family firms that they want to pass on a healthy, efficient, well-structured, well-managed organisation to the next generation of family members, that as we're in a phase of transition across the generations, that this is absolutely key to survival and prospering for family firms going forward across this generation and the next. As that transition occurs, we see that there's a recognised importance of corporate governance, but how to implement better practices is still an issue, and we're not there yet in terms of implementation. Some of the key issues that come up in this sector is about succession, conflict, and continuity, which is related to the transition to the next generation of the family. Things like the criteria for family members joining the firm, for moving up to more senior levels of management and control within the firm. And also, on that topic of management and control, the empowerment of those managing the business. Clearly, a strong board is key. A strong board, a strong, well-functioning board that is focused on the business and is acting as the right interlocutor between the family and the company. What also was clear is that as this transition from an older to a younger generation takes place, there's a feeling amongst firms of the importance and the benefit of codifying rules and guidelines, writing them down so that they can be referred to. And this is partly due to the increase in sheer number and complexity of the next generation of family members. We've seen today that a strong and properly constituted board is at the heart of good governance, and that's equally true in family firms as it is in any other type of organisation. What's really important, what came across in our research, is the importance being attached by family firms to ensuring that their company board is more dynamic, more professional, more competitive, and this is definitely a driving force across family firms in the region. To give you some examples of data that we have discovered, for example, 55% of family firms in the GCC interviewed have non-family members on their board, and we can see this very much as evidence of wanting to diversify and professionalise a board of a firm. 42% of family firms have non-family, non-executive directors on the board, and 54% have family, non-executive directors on the board. Interestingly, 32% of family firms have a female family member on the board, which we see as a very positive sign in terms of board diversity. There's some other data in the report which you can see when you can pick it up, and further analysis in the areas of what tends to make up the board and what's happening there. Independent directors, we certainly see an increase in the level of importance attached to independent directors. And some of the benefits that were cited during the interviews that we carried out were in areas such as, the benefits of adding independent directors to a family firm board in terms of adding discipline, structure, strategic focus to board decision making, that it formalizes the role and the responsibility of the board so that it's less easy, for example, to bypass or cancel board meetings or change them at the last moment. And it means that the board is more likely to be focusing on core strategic discussions about profitability, operations, strategy of the firm going forward because of that mix of directors on a board. What became apparent also is that what family firms are looking for in independent directors, strategic skills, corporate governance skills, legal, financial skills, that industry knowledge is becoming less important in this context. On board committees, we found that 71% of family firms interviewed have an audit committee in place. Now, the audit committee may not always be the fully independent board committee that we would see in many other listed companies, but it is still true to say that 71% of family firms interviewed have an audit committee in place. Much less so in terms of a remuneration or compensation committee, with only 43% of firms, and very, very many fewer family firms with corporate governance or nomination committees in place. On board performance evaluation, very, very few GCC family firms have mechanisms in place to evaluate board performance. Many are talking about it. Some may even have agreed that there's something they would like to do in principle, but there's very little implementation so far. It tends to be seen as a sensitive issue that could potentially have the potential to negatively affect family dynamics. And in one particular quote, which illustrated the way many firms are thinking, is, why would we evaluate the board at this point? We don't have board terms, and we're not going to change the board based on performance evaluation, so what's the point? So that's very much the thinking that we saw at the moment on that particular topic. On family governance, definitely an increasing awareness or understanding that if improvements are being made in corporate governance, and the board is one of the key ways to manage that the implementation of a family council is the equivalent on the family side, a forum potentially for family members to meet, discuss the business, almost the equivalent of a board for the family. And it can be an intermediary between family members and the board. What we found is that 52% of the firms interviewed have clearly defined responsibilities between the family shareholders and the board, for example, but only 20% of those firms would describe that as being fully implemented. So again, I would say we're in a transition in terms of understanding and the implementation of this. We found that 53% of the family firms interviewed have no governance structure in place for the family, no family constitution, no written rules governing how they organise themselves as a family, for example. And 37% have a family council in place amongst those interviewed. On transparency, there is very clearly and definitely a strong culture of privacy amongst family firms in the GCC. What we did see is that there are three audiences for disclosure, almost, if you like. The first is seen as the family, the widening base of family shareholders, and increasingly family firms are producing internal, strategic, forward-focused reports which are distributed in order to enhance strategic communications across the family. And 76% of firms are doing that. 63% of firms are disclosing information to banks and business partners. And we're seeing that banks are becoming more rigorous in terms of the information they're requiring in lending arrangements with family firms, for example. Also, more requirements on disclosure from international or multinational business partners, for example. Only 12% of the firms interviewed disclose any information whatsoever publicly, and it is still true to say that there is seen to be very little business case for public disclosure in that respect. In terms of accountability, we asked questions about what structures, systems, policies firms have in place. We found, for example, that 63% of firms have a code of ethics in place, 45% have an anti-bribery and corruption policy. But in terms of implementation, again, only roughly 31% of firms feel that they have those fully implemented at this stage. So again, we're in a transition of implementation, I would say. In conclusion, I would say that we can definitely see increasing professionalism, international competitiveness, and at the end of the day, as has been mentioned, family firms are the listed companies of the future, and you can see that the part of that transition is driven by that. There is an awareness of increasing importance of corporate governance, but it is still not a high strategic priority for firms. There's almost no board performance evaluation. Key issues are around succession and the management of conflict. Talking, but difficulties in implementing more rigorous structures in terms of family governance. On transparency, as I said, increasing strategic family communication, but very little public disclosure still. In terms of what the Pearl Initiative will do to follow through on this work, we, as I said, produce good practice case studies from within the GCC with the view that this is one way to get the message across about the benefits of implementing higher standards in these areas. We are working at the moment on good practice case studies within the GCC on effective board processes, and also pulling out some more detailed case studies on family firms who are ahead of the curve in terms of the transition that I've described. We continue to hold business leader roundtables right across the GCC to put these topics on the table, and working with universities to get students involved in working on and thinking about these topics and these issues. With that, I'd like to close and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Imelda, for the good presentation and the interesting information, and especially the information that really makes a real case for promoting good corporate governance practices in the family firms when it comes to the contribution of the family firms in non-oil GDP of the GCC, which amounts to 80%. That would give a real case for really thinking of promoting the corporate governance aspects within those firms. Continuing on that path, you touched upon the initiatives either being taken from the firms themselves in order to open up for new finances or from other interested parties. What do you think the main probably incentives or the main drivers that one would probably throw on the table for those firms in order to let them open up and be transparent and to promote good governance?
I think access to finance is certainly a driver for some family firms. Of course, there are many family firms who are not in need of external finance at the moment, and that is clearly not a driver for them. What came across loud and clear in the discussions that we held was a drive about passing on a well-governed, well-functioning business to the next generation. There is definitely, you know, the saying about the first generation of a family business builds, the second generation maintains, and the third generation possibly loses it. There's a definitely, you know, an understanding that proactively firms want to improve the practices and the systems and the processes they have in place, because it's a matter of survival through to the next generation. Not just survival, but growth, prospering, becoming more internationally competitive, that this is important to sustain a successful business and a well-functioning family through to the next generation and beyond.
Great. Thank you so much, Emilde.